Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. If you're new here, this is where we sit down with the men who came out to these islands looking for something: a second chance, a warm place to land, someone to come home to, and we let them tell you what it actually cost them. Today's story belongs to Henk Vermeulen. He's 55 years old, Dutch, from Rotterdam originally, though he spent most of his working life staging out of Den Helder on the northern coast. 26 years on North Sea oil platforms, 14 days on, 14 days off, helicopters over grey water in February. He was a roustabout supervisor, which means for a good part of his career he was the man responsible for making sure nobody got crushed, dropped, or drowned on his watch. He was, by every account including his own, very good at that job. Henk is not a fool. I want to say that up front, because some of you will be tempted to reach that conclusion before he's finished, and I'd ask you to hold off. This is a man who inspected equipment for a living, a man who thought in checklists, a man who believed, genuinely believed, that anything that goes wrong can be traced back to a failed part, and that the failed part can be replaced. Then something happened at home that had no failed part, and after that he had money, and he had time, and he had absolutely nobody expecting him anywhere in the world. What he did with all three of those things is what we're going to talk about today. I'll tell you now, this one is not a simple scam story. I've sat with a lot of these accounts on this channel, and this one refuses to fit neatly into the box. There are things Henk says toward the end of this that I've thought about for weeks. He built something. It's still standing. And I'll leave it there, because he tells it better than I could. One quick thing before I hand over. After hearing so many of these stories on this channel, we put together a guide covering what we've learned from them. The practical stuff. The things that come up again and again. It's linked in the description if you want it. That's all I'll say about it. Here's Henk's story, in his own words. I will tell you about my job first, because I think you cannot understand the rest without it. 26 years I worked offshore, North Sea. You fly out from Den Helder in a Sikorsky with about 18 other men who smell like cigarettes and wet coats. And it is 30 minutes, 40 minutes over the water. And then you are on a platform for 14 days. 14 days on, 14 days off. That was my life. That was the shape of my life. If you want to know what kind of man I am, that is the answer. I am a man who lived in 14-day pieces for a quarter of a century. On a rig, everything is a system. This is not philosophy. This is just true. If a winch fails, there is a reason the winch failed. Bearing, hydraulic line. Someone skipped a service interval. You find it, you write it down, you replace the part, you sign the sheet. Nobody says these things happen. On a platform, these things happen is how men die. You inspect, you find the fault, you fix the fault. I was good at this. I was the supervisor for the last 9 years, and I had no fatalities on my crew, not one, and I know that is partly luck, but I would like to think it was also me. My wife was Marieke. We married when I was 31, 23 years. No children. We tried. It did not happen, and after a while we stopped talking about it, which I think now was a mistake, but it is what we did. She was a school administrator. She had a laugh that was much too loud for a small woman, and she used to leave notes in my kit bag when I packed for rotation, stupid ones, a drawing of a helicopter with a face on it. Don't fall in. I found one of those about a year ago in a bag I hadn't opened. That was not a good afternoon. Here is the thing about being offshore. You leave. And the whole time you are gone, the house continues without you. You are not there for the burst pipe, the dead cat, the argument with the neighbor about the hedge. And then you come back, and she tells you all of it in one evening, and you catch up. That was the arithmetic. Leave, return, she is still there. 14 days is nothing. 14 days is a nap. She died on a Tuesday. Brain hemorrhage. In the kitchen, in Schiedam, standing at the counter. They think she was making coffee because the kettle had boiled and switched itself off. She was 51 years old and she had no history of anything. Blood pressure fine. She walked to work. I was 3 days into rotation. There is a procedure for this, actually. Compassionate evacuation. It is in the manual. But the weather was bad that day, and the aircraft could not come, and by the time I put my boots on the concrete at Den Helder, it had been 9 hours. 9 hours she was on that floor before the neighbor thought something was wrong. I do not say that for sympathy. I say it because I want you to understand what it did to a man like me. My entire working life was built on the idea that you are never absent when it matters, because you inspect, you anticipate, you plan the maintenance so the failure does not come while you are away. And she failed while I was away. And there was no component, nothing to trace it back to, no skipped service interval, no bearing, nothing I could have found in a walk-around. The doctor in Rotterdam explained it to me twice, and both times I sat there thinking, yes, but what caused it? And he kept saying, well, sometimes a vessel is simply weak from birth. Sometimes a vessel is simply weak from birth. What am I supposed to do with that? I went back offshore after 6 weeks because I did not know what else to do. Lasted 11 months. Then I stopped, and I sold the house. That is the part where the money comes in. And I know that is what half of you are here for. So, the terrace in Schiedam went for a good price, better than I expected, and I took my occupational pension early, which my sister told me not to do, and she was correct. After everything settled, I had about €195,000 sitting in an ING account. $210,000, near enough, if that means more to you. I moved into a rented studio in Den Helder because I did not want the house, and I did not want to think about where to go. And here is what I could not explain to anyone at the time, so I will try to explain it to you. I was not lonely. That is not the word. Lonely is when you want company. I did not particularly want company. My sister called, my old crew called, a couple of them dragged me out for beers, and I sat there fine. It was that nobody was expecting me, anywhere, ever again. 26 years, somebody always knew where I was supposed to be and when. There was a rota on the wall. There was a woman who knew that, on the 14th day at about 6 in the evening, I would come through the door and want soup. And then there was no rota, and no soup, and no 14th day. And I would wake up at 3 in the morning with my body still running a shift pattern for a job that had ended. A man with money, no rota, and nobody expecting him. I did not know it at the time, but that is the most expensive thing you can be. 3 in the morning is a specific time. If you have never worked shifts, you will not understand this, but the body keeps the rota after the job is finished. 26 years of waking at 3 for a handover, and then no handover. I would lie there in that studio in Den Helder, listening to the wind come off the harbor, and I would be completely awake, alert, ready to go and do something, and there was nothing to do. Nothing at all. Not even a light on across the street. Because it is Den Helder in November and everyone sensible is asleep. So I read. That is what I did with the hours. I read the news until the news made me angry, and then I read other things. It started with Bas de Wit. I worked with him on a Malampaya contract years back. That is a gas field in the Philippines, off Palawan, and a lot of Dutch and Norwegian men have done rotations out there over the years. He was in Rotterdam that autumn, and we had a few beers at a cafe near the Oud Haven. He is a talker, Bas. I am not. That is why the friendship works. He said, "Henk, what are you doing here?" He said, "You have money, you have no house, it is dark at 4 in the afternoon. What exactly are you doing?" And then he talked about Cebu for about 40 minutes. The cost of things, €20 for a proper meal for 4 people. Warm all year. He said the thing that men always say, which is that people there are friendly. They smile. They talk to you in the street. I said that sounded exhausting. He laughed and said, "Yes, for you it would be." But I went home and I looked it up. I want to be honest about this part because one think this is where it actually starts, not with any woman. It starts with a man of 53 sitting on the edge of a rented bed at 3 in the morning with a tablet, typing "cost of living Cebu" into Google. I read those expat forums for 4 months before I did anything else. You know the ones. Same 20 men arguing with each other since 2011. Half of them bitter, half of them evangelical, all of them absolutely certain. And I read the warnings. I did read them. I am not a man who skips the safety briefing. I read about the sponsorship, the family, the money, the girl with 3 other boyfriends. I read a very long thread about a Canadian who built a house in Samar and lost it. I read that one twice. I remember thinking, yes, but those men did not do it properly. That is the sentence. If you take one thing from me today, take that sentence, because I have heard it in my own head about 20 other subjects in my life, and I was right every single time except this one. Why the Philippines and not Thailand? Not Vietnam? 2 reasons, and one of them I did not admit to myself until much later. The first is language. My English is decent. It is the language of the rigs. Everything is in English out there. The manuals, the radio, the safety cards. In the Philippines, everybody speaks English. Signs, government forms, the girl at the counter in Mercury Drug. I thought about Thailand, and I thought, I am 53. I am not going to learn to read an alphabet I cannot even see the shape of. That was the practical reason. The second reason is that it is Catholic. Marieke's family were Catholic. Brabant Catholic, the real thing, her mother with the rosary in her handbag. I am not religious. I was married in a church, because that is what you do, and I sat through Mass at Christmas for 23 years thinking about tie-back procedures. But there was something about a country where they still do all of that, where the church bells go and the buses have a little Santo Niño on the dashboard and people say, "God is good," and mean it. I did not say this to Bas. I would not have said it to anyone. But I think a part of me was looking for the world Marieke came from, and Shidam did not have it anymore. February, I joined Christian Filipina, not Filipino Cupid. I looked at that one and closed it. The name of the other one made me feel like it was a different sort of place, which, well, I told myself I was doing research. That is the exact word I used in my own head. Research. A 53-year-old man doing research at 3 in the morning with his reading glasses on. The first weeks were what everybody says they are. I got 20, 30 messages very fast. "Hi, honey. Good morning. Have you eaten?" Girls of 24 telling a man with gray in his beard that he looked strong. One of them called me "my king" in the second message, and I actually laughed out loud, alone, in a rented studio, at 2:30. And the money came up quick. Not always as a request, as a mention. My mother is sick. My load is finished. I cannot video call because my phone is broken. Maybe you can help me buy a new one. Only $9,000. That is about $145. I am Dutch, and I was a supervisor. I do not soften things. I would write back, "No, I am not sending money to someone I have not met." And that was the end of it, every time. Account gone, or just silence. 10, 12 of those. I was almost enjoying it, in a grim way, like inspecting equipment, and finding the fault every single time. Rowena was the one who was slow. She wrote in April, nothing clever. She said she had seen that I worked offshore and asked whether it was frightening, because her brother had gone to Qatar for construction work and their mother had cried for a week. That was the whole message. No honey, no king. The first answered because it was a real question. 38 years old. Cashier at a supermarket in Cebu City. I will not name it. She still might be there. 12-hour shifts standing up. A daughter, Angel, 12 years old, living with her parents in a barangay outside Ormoc, over on Leyte, because the school there is cheaper and her mother can watch the girl. Her father boy had been a fisherman, and then his back went. And what did we talk about? For 4 months? Her feet. I am serious. Her feet after a shift, and the price of galunggong at the market. That is a small mackerel. It is what people eat when the money is thin, and she would tell me it had gone from P160 to 200 a kilo, and what that meant. Her mother's diabetes, and the cost of the strips for the meter, the rain, whether Dutch people really eat raw herring. I sent her a photograph of a herring stand at the harbor, and she was appalled, genuinely appalled, and I have never enjoyed appalling anyone so much. She had a laugh that was too loud for a small woman. I know what that sounds like. I am not stupid. I heard it myself when I said it just now. In August, I finally offered. Angel's tuition, P18,000 for the year, about $290, nothing, less than I used to spend on diesel driving to the heliport. I typed it out and sent it. She said, no. I said, don't be foolish. It is not a large amount for me. She said, no again, and then she said, and I remember this because I read it maybe 200 times over the next 3 years. She said, Henk, I don't want that you will think this is what I am talking to you for. 4 months of nothing, and then a refusal. Twice. That was the load-bearing beam. Everything I built after that, I built on top of that one message. Every time something did not add up, later, I went back and stood on it, and it held. I booked the September flight to Mactan the next week. The heat at Mactan comes at you when the aircraft door opens. I had been told this, and I did not believe it, because I have worked in the Gulf of Mexico, and I thought I knew warm. This is not warm. This is a wet towel over your face at 11 o'clock at night. My shirt was through before I reached immigration. But that is not what I remember about arriving. What I remember is coming out past the barrier into the arrivals hall, all those people pressed against the rail, the drivers with the cardboard signs, families with balloons for someone coming home. And Rowena was standing there in a yellow top holding a piece of paper with my name on it. My name. Spelled correctly, which nobody in the Philippines managed again for 3 years. Somebody was expecting me at a specific time and place. I want you to understand that this was the first time in 22 months that had happened. Not the woman, the expecting. She was smaller than I thought. That is normal, I know. Everybody says that. And she was nervous. She did not touch me. She did a sort of half bow and then took my bag, which I would not let her carry, and we argued about the bag for about a minute in the middle of the arrivals hall. That was our first conversation in the flesh. A disagreement about luggage. The first week was good, and I am not going to let what came after take that off me. We stayed in a hotel in Mandaue, nothing special, P2,200 a night, about $35. She had taken leave from the supermarket. We ate at a place on AS Fortuna, where you point at fish in a tray, and they grill it. And I had my first San Miguel with ice in it, which I complained about, and she thought that was very funny. We went to SM Seaside because she wanted to show me the biggest mall she knew, and I walked around this enormous air-conditioned cathedral of shops thinking, well, this is the same as Rotterdam, only cleaner. Roosters at 4 in the morning. Karaoke from 3 houses away. Someone destroying a Whitney Houston song at 11 at night. Every night. Then we went to Ormoc. You take the fast ferry from Cebu City, about 2.5 hours across to Leyte. Then a jeepney, and then a habal-habal. That is a motorcycle where a man puts 3 people and a sack of rice on it and drives. Inland from Ormoc, up into the barangay. Coconut, then more coconut. Concrete road, then no concrete road. Her family's place was a 2-room house with a tin roof and a Bahay Kubo section at the back where the cooking happened. A basketball court in the middle of the barangay with the paint gone, which I have since learned is in every single settlement in that country, no matter how poor. Chickens under the house. And then about 40 people came out to look at me. Her mother is Delia. Small, hard hands, 61 at the time. Her father, Boy, had been a fisherman until his back went, and he sat in a plastic chair and shook my hand and did not say much, which I appreciated more than anything anyone else did that day. 4 siblings. Ricky, the brother, the one who had been in Qatar. Angel, the daughter, 12, in her school uniform even though it was Saturday, because I think she had been told to look smart. And 9 children, nieces, nephews, some cousins. I could never get the count right. Within 1 hour, every one of them was calling me Tito, uncle. Not a joke, not a courtesy. They simply reassigned me. That is how it works. You arrive, and you are placed. They killed a pig. I did not know they were going to kill a pig. There was Lechon and pancit because it was somebody's birthday that week, and a great deal of rice, and Delia kept putting food on my plate every time it went below half, which meant I ate for about 4 hours. Before we ate, they prayed. All of them, standing, Boy leading it, thanking God for the visitor and for the food. In Ware, then in English for me, which was thoughtful. And I stood there, with my head down and my eyes open, looking at the concrete floor. I have to be careful how I say this next part. 2 years earlier, I had eaten every meal standing at a kitchen counter in Den Helder. Every single one. And now there was a room full of people who were, for whatever reason, delighted that I existed. I am not a soft man. But I went outside afterwards and stood by the water pump for a bit, and I did not come back in immediately. Now, the other thing that happened on that trip. 10 days in, Boy went down. Kidneys. He had been ill longer than anyone had told me. They took him to the district hospital in Ormoc, and I went with them. And if you have never been in a provincial Filipino hospital, let me describe it. The family brings the food. The family brings the sheets. The family sits on the floor in the corridor for 3 days. And nothing at all happens until somebody pays at the window. Not, we will bill you. Pay at the window. Dialysis is around $4,000 to $5,000 a session, and he needed a run of them, plus the admission, plus the medicines from the mercury drug across the road because the hospital pharmacy had nothing. Nobody asked me. I want to be very clear about that because it matters to how I understood the whole thing afterwards. Nobody asked me. Rowena went out to the corridor and was on the phone to somebody, and I could hear her voice doing the arithmetic. And Ricky was talking about selling something, and I stood up and went to the window and paid. P95,000, in the end, over about 9 days, around 1,350. And here is the part 1 still have not worked out, and I have had a long time to work on it. It felt good, not noble. Good, the way a repair feels good For 2 years I had been carrying a problem with no failed component, no part to order, nothing to sign off. And then here was a problem with a price on it. And I paid the price, and the problem improved. A man came off a trolley in a corridor and went into a bed. I did that. I could see that I did that. That is the mechanism. That is the whole engine of this story, right there. And it is not really about Rowena at all. When I flew back to Schiphol in October, Delia held both my hands at the gate of the barangay and said, "Now you have family again, Henk." She meant it. I still believe she meant it. And I will come back to that later because it becomes complicated. I started sending $8,000 a month after I got home. About $130. Rowena did not ask for that either. I offered, and she did the same thing she did in August. She said no. And this time, I simply did it anyway, and told her afterwards. It was for Angel's school and for the medicines. $130. I had €195,000 in an ING account. It was less than I used to spend on diesel and coffee, driving to the heliport in a month. That is how it starts. Not with a large sum, with a small sum that is so small it is not even a decision. And the thing nobody tells you is that the amount is never the point. The point is that you have started a pattern, and now there is a date in the month when something is expected of you. I had a rota again. I moved in January. Not a decision so much as a series of small ones that added up. I flew back in November for 3 weeks. Then in December I looked at the rent I was paying in Den Helder for a studio I did not like. And I looked at the flight prices. And I did the arithmetic that every man in my position does. And then I gave notice on the studio and put 4 boxes in my sister's attic in Rotterdam. And that was that. Marja, my sister, drove me to Schiphol. She said one sentence about it the whole way, which was, "Just don't sign anything." I said I was not going to sign anything. I meant it as well. I took an apartment in Mandaue, 2nd floor, 2 bedrooms, $25,000 a month, around $400. Air conditioning in 1 room, tiled floor, a view of the back of a warehouse and a basketball court where boys played until midnight. There was a Sari Sari store on the corner run by a woman called Nene, who within about 10 days knew my brand of coffee and would have it out on the counter when she saw me crossing the road. I liked that more than I can explain to you. Rowena kept her job at the supermarket for 4 more months. Then she stopped. And I want to be honest here because this is the part where people always assume there was pressure. There was no pressure. It was my idea. I said to her one evening, she had done a 12-hour shift, standing, and her ankles were swollen, and she was going to do it again the next day for about $12,000 a month. That is $190. I said, "This is stupid. I am here. Stop." I was proud of that. I was actually proud of myself for saying it. What I did not think about, because I am a man who thinks in systems and not in people, was that I had just removed the only independent income in the entire structure. Every peso that reached that family from that day forward came through me. Now, the 18 months. I am going to give you the numbers, because I know that is partly why you are here, and because I have them written down. I will explain about the writing down in a minute. The store came first, April. That is 4 months in. Delia wanted to expand the Sari Sari at the barangay, proper shelving, a chest freezer, stock, a small extension on the front of the house. $180,000 all in, which is about $2,900. And this is a good idea, you understand? This is exactly what you want. Not a gift, a business. Something that generates. I was pleased. I went over on the ferry and helped set the shelves myself, and Boy sat in his plastic chair and supervised me, which he enjoyed enormously. The store never made money. Not once, not in any month. And the reason is not that anybody stole from me. The reason is that in a barangay, you do not refuse credit to your neighbors or your cousins, because they are your neighbors and your cousins. So the stock walks out on a list, and the list gets long, and then the freezer is empty, and there is a notebook full of names. Nobody was lying to me. That is just what the store was always going to be. I did not understand that for about a year. June. Ricky, the brother, wanted a tricycle. That is the motorcycle with the sidecar. It is a taxi. It is real work. A driver in Ormoc might clear 600, 800 a day. Second-hand unit with the body already built, $265,000, about $2,650. I said yes because it was work, and because Ricky had been in Qatar for 6 years pouring concrete for other people, and I respected that. August. Angel moved to a private school in Ormoc, $38,000 a year, $610. Uniforms, shoes, the books. She was 13 and clever, and she wanted to be a pharmacist, and I paid it without a second's thought, and I would pay it again tomorrow. I want that in the record. October. The nephew, Jomar, nursing in Cebu. $140,000 a year with the fees and the board, around $2,250. Then 2 funerals. The grandmother in the December, and an uncle in the March after that, a man I had met exactly once, at a fiesta, who shook my hand and gave me a glass of Tanduay at 10 in the morning. A wake in the Philippines is 9 days. The family sits with the body, and the whole barangay comes, and you feed all of them, all 9 days, and there is a tent and plastic chairs and a card game running in the corner around the clock. Between the 2 of them, near enough $200,000, $3,200, and underneath all of that, the drip, Gcash. 2-3 times a month, small amounts, 3,000 here, 7,000 there. A niece's tooth? A cousin's fare to Manila for an interview. The roof after a storm. Fertilizer. A phone that fell in a bucket. By the end of that 18 months, I was putting through something between P80,000 and 120,000 a month. Everything counted. Call it $1,300 to $1,900 every month. And here is the thing about a man like me. In August of that first year, I started a spreadsheet. Of course I did. 26 years of maintenance logs and permit-to-work sheets. Columns, date, amount, purpose, who asked. I am good at this. It is the only thing I have ever been really good at. I kept it for 5 months. Then I stopped opening it. I did not delete it. I did not decide anything. I simply stopped looking, the way you stop looking at a bank statement. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because on a platform, if a man knows a gauge is reading wrong, and he puts tape over it rather than dealing with it, that man gets walked off the installation the same day. That is a sackable offense. That is the thing we all agreed was the unforgivable one. I taped over the gauge. I did it with my own hands. There were other things I taped over. The store money never reconciled. Not once. And when I asked, carefully, gently, because you learn very fast in that country that direct questions make people go quiet and smile, the answer was always vague. Credit, prices, the supplier. I told myself, provincial bookkeeping. These are not accountants, Hank. Do not be the European with the clipboard. Her phone was always face down on the table. Always. And I told myself, so is everyone's. There was a fortnight in the February when she went to Leyte and I was not invited. Family business, she said. Something about her aunt and a land dispute. And it was better if the Kano was not there because it would complicate things. And that is true, by the way. That is genuinely true. A foreigner turning up to a family land argument in the province makes everything worse. It was a completely reasonable explanation. And there was the cousin, Marilu. She was about 30, worked in a bakery in Ormoc. And she was at every family occasion for 3 years, and she never once looked at me properly. Not hostile. She would greet me. She would put food on my plate, and her eyes would go somewhere over my shoulder. Christmas, the first one. Everybody drunk on Red Horse and singing, and I caught her watching me from the doorway. And when I looked back, she went inside. Shy, I thought. Some people are shy. I think about that a great deal now. Meanwhile, Rowena was crying in the kitchen in Mandaue one night in the September. Properly crying. Saying she was a burden. That she never wanted this. That she was ashamed of what her family asked of me. And I put my hand on her head and told her not to be foolish. I believed her. I still believe her. That is the whole problem. The house was not my idea. I want that stated plainly, but I also want to say immediately that it does not matter, because I was the one with the money, and the money is what decides. It came up slowly. That is how everything in that country arrives. Nothing is proposed. Things simply begin to exist in the conversation. First, it was a joke about the tin roof at her parents' place, how it sounded in a typhoon like a man beating a bin. Then it was Delia's knee and the stairs. Then one evening in the apartment in Mandaue, with the aircon rattling, Rowena said the rent was $25,000 a month, and in 20 months, that was half a house in the province. She was right, by the way. That is arithmetic. I have always been weak to arithmetic, and I knew the law. I want to be extremely clear about this, because if you are going to think I am an idiot, I would rather you think it about the correct thing. A foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines, not in a girlfriend's name, not in a wife's name, not by any arrangement you invent at a kitchen table. I had read it on those forums at 3 in the morning in Den Helder. I had read the thread about the Canadian in Samar twice. And in the December of that first year, I sat in a bar on Mango Avenue with a Belgian called Mark, who had put 4 million pesos into a house on Panglao and had precisely nothing. And he told me the whole thing over 3 San Miguels. And I bought the third one. So I did what a man like me does. I looked at it as a structure. A condominium I could actually own. Legally, properly, my name on the title. 40% foreign cap in the building, and all of that. There were units in Mandaue for P3.5 to P4 million, around $56,000 to $64,000. That was the correct answer. That was the answer any sensible person would give me, and I did not want it. Because a condominium is a box for a man on his own. I had done a box for a man on his own, 22 months of it in Den Helder with the wind off the harbor, and I was not going back to a box. That is the entire reason. Not romance, not stupidity exactly. I did not want a well-titled asset. I wanted a house with people in it. I did raise the structure once. Once. I said to Rowena, carefully at breakfast because I had rehearsed it, that we could do a long lease on the land. 25 years, renewable, registered properly, so that if anything happened, God forbid, there would be a paper. Or a corporation, 60-40, though the lawyer would need to set it up. And she went very quiet and put her cup down and said, "You think my mother will take your house?" Not angry, hurt. And when a Filipino is hurt, they do not shout. They go polite, and the politeness is worse than shouting. She said, "Of course, if that is what I need, we can go to the lawyer." And she said it in a voice like a door closing. Delia had fed me lechon and prayed over me and called me family. And I was going to hand her a document. I let it go. 2 days later, I told her, forget it. I was being a Dutchman about it. And she laughed, and it was over. That is the moment. If you want the moment where I stopped being a man who inspects things, that is it. And it lasted about 90 seconds, and cost me €105,000. We broke ground in the March. Original budget was P4.2 million. Call it $67,000. Two-story concrete hollow block, proper reinforced posts, because that province gets hit, and I was not going to build something that leaves in a wind. I had seen what Yolanda did to Leyte, and every single person in that barangay had a story about it. 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a proper counter, because Delia had cooked her whole life squatting over a fire in a bahay kubo out the back. And I was happy. I need you to hear that. I was on that site 5-6 days a week. I hired the crew. I checked the rebar spacing myself. I stood over the concrete pours because, in the province, they will water down a mix if you let them. And I have poured concrete on platforms in the North Sea. I know exactly what a bad mix looks like when it goes in. The men called me Sir Henk and thought I was mad. This big Dutchman with a spirit level at 7 in the morning. That was the best year I had had since Marieke died. I will not pretend otherwise. I had somewhere to be at 7 in the morning, and a job to do, and a result you could see going up out of the ground. By the September, the number was 5.4 million. By the January, it was 6.4 million, roughly $105,000, 40% over. Now, some of that is honest. Cement went up, steel went up, we changed the roof spec after I looked at the trusses. Anybody who has built anything knows the number moves. But some of it was not. Ricky handled the buying because Ricky had 6 years in Qatar and knew the suppliers in Ormoc, and it made sense. And twice that I found. The same delivery was paid for 2 times. Gravel in the June, hollow block in the October. I found the second one myself, going back through the receipts one night with a beer, doing the thing I used to do with maintenance sheets. I did not say anything. That is the sentence I would like to take back more than any other. I found a fault. I confirmed the fault, and I did not report it, because it was maybe P60,000, and because saying it out loud would have meant sitting in that house and accusing the brother of the woman I lived with in front of everybody, and destroying the entire thing for the price of a small car. Saving face. It gets into you. You start doing it yourself, and you do not even notice. And Rowena was in Cebu more. That is the other thing from that period. She would go over on the ferry for 2-3 days. The dentist, a friend, papers for Angel's school, every few weeks, which is completely normal. She had lived there for years. She had people. I was covered in cement dust in Leyte, and glad of the quiet, honestly. In the February, I looked at the ING account online, and it said something in the 60s, €68,000 from 195, and that was the first time I felt actual fear in my chest. Not about her. About me. About a man of 54 with a small occupational payment starting at 60, the state one not until 67, and a burn rate that had eaten 2/3 of everything in under 3 years. I told myself, yes, but it is not gone. It is in the house. Say that sentence out loud sometime. It is in the house. We had the blessing in the April. A priest came up from Ormoc, and they put a coin under the doorstep and salt in the corners, and he went through every room with the water. 40-odd relatives, a pig, 3 cases of Red Horse, the karaoke machine out on the concrete until 2 in the morning. There is a photograph of me on the front steps that day. Big Dutchman, sunburnt, holding a plate. Delia on one side, Rowena on the other. Angel and about 9 children on the steps below. Every person in that photograph knew whose name was on the title. And so did I. That is the thing. So did I. It was a bakery on Real Street in Ormoc. That is where it happened. 6 months after the blessing, a Thursday, about 10 in the morning, and I was buying pan de sal because I had got into the habit of taking bread up to the barangay when I came from town. Marilu came in behind me, and she did not go to the counter. She said, "Tito Henk, can I sit with you?" I have thought about that morning more than any other morning of my life, including the one with the helicopter. And what I remember most is that the fan on the wall was broken and it clicked. Every rotation. Click. The whole time she was talking, she had been paid. That is the first thing she said, before anything else, and she said it as though she needed to confess it before she could go on. P2,000 a month, about $32, from Ricky, since the year I moved to Cebu. Not to do anything, just to not say anything. She had taken it for nearly 3 years, and she could not take it any more. And she said the reason was that she had seen me on the site with the spirit level at 7 in the morning, and she had to go to confession every week and lie about why she was there. Then she told me about Terje, Norwegian, 61, Stavanger. He had met Rowena on the same website I did, and he had met her about 8 months before I did. 6 years by then. He came out twice a year, usually February and August, stayed 3 weeks in a hotel in Cebu City, and he sent money, less than me, considerably less, maybe $30,000 a month, $480, and he believed exactly what I believed. He had photographs of Angel on his phone. He had met Delia. He called Boy Papa. And Marilu said the thing that took my legs out from under me, which was not about the Norwegian at all. She said, "Everybody knows, Tito. Everybody knows. Only you and him do not know. 40 people at the blessing. The priest with the water. The children on the steps. Now here is where I tell you what I did, and I think it will surprise you, because it surprised me. I did not shout at her. I did not go up to the barangay. I thanked Marilu. I actually thanked her. And I bought her a coffee, and she cried, and I did not. And then I took a habal-habal back to the house, and I sat down at the table on the ground floor with my laptop, and I opened the spreadsheet, the one I had stopped looking at 15 months earlier. And I did what I should have done from the first week. I inspected. 3 days. 3 days I sat at that table with the transaction history from GCash going back 3 years, and my ING statements, and the receipts from the build in a shoebox, and I built the timeline properly. Columns, dates, cross-references, the way you do it when you are reconstructing an incident and you want to know the actual sequence, not the sequence people remember. And the pattern was there. It had always been there. That is what I want you to understand. I did not discover new information. It was all already in my own records, in my own handwriting, and I had simply never laid it next to itself. February and August, every year. Rowena in Cebu for 3-4 days at a time, sometimes a week. The dentist, the papers, her friend Jocelyn. Every February, every August. 6 times over 3 years, and I had never once put those trips in a row and looked at them. And the emergencies. This is the part that made me feel ill, because it is so mechanical. The GCash requests clustered. 2-3 weeks of nothing, then 4 requests in 10 days. And when I laid those clusters against the months where Terje's visits had not happened, because Marilu had told me the pattern, she knew the pattern, the whole barangay knew the pattern, they matched. Not perfectly, but enough. When the Norwegian money was thin, the emergencies came to me. There was a niece's tooth. In a month I can now see there was no niece's tooth. I made a list of the things I could prove, the things I could infer, and the things I did not know. Standard incident report format. 3 columns. I still have it. Then I went to the barangay, and I asked her. No shouting. I am not a shouter. I put the laptop on the table in the kitchen I had paid for, in the house I had built, and I said, Tell me about Terje." She did not deny it. She did not even try. She sat down across from me, and she put her hands flat on the table, and she started to cry. And I want to say this very carefully, because it is the crux of everything. I still believe the crying was real. You can tell me I am a fool. Many people have. But I sat across from that woman for 3.5 years, and I watched her cry about her father's kidneys, and about her daughter's school, and about being a burden, and I know what her face does. That was not performance. That was a woman who had been carrying something heavy for 6 years, and had just put it down. She said she loved me. She said it 3 or 4 times. She said Terje was before me, which is true, 8 months before. She said she had tried to end it twice, and she probably had. I don't know. And then she said the sentence I have not been able to get rid of. She said, "Henk, my family will eat either way." That is the whole thing. Right there. That is the entire architecture of it in 6 words. I said, "So I was insurance." And she said, "No, no." And then she stopped, and she did not finish the sentence. And that not finishing was more honest than anything else she said that day. I asked her, and this was cruel of me. I know it was cruel. I asked her whether it was money or love. Which one? And she looked at me like I had asked her whether she breathed in or out. That is a Western question. That question does not exist in that kitchen. In that kitchen you love the man who feeds your father, and you feed your father with the man who loves you, and there is no seam between the two where you could get a knife in. I wanted her to pick one, so I could file it correctly. She could not pick one, because to her there was only one thing. She asked me not to go, and I could not tell whether she meant me or the money. And standing there in that kitchen, I came to the conclusion that she could not tell either. And that is the most honest thing I can say about the entire relationship. I slept in the room I built that night. On my own. The next morning, Delia made me breakfast. Fried rice, egg, dried fish. She put it in front of me and squeezed my shoulder the way she always did, and asked me if I had slept well. And she did not mention it. And nobody mentioned it, not that morning or the morning after. The children went to school. Ricky's tricycle went past on the road. The store was open. Saving face. The household simply continues. You do not have a scene in the Philippines. You have a smooth surface, and everything underneath it stays exactly where it was. I went out and walked the boundary of the property that afternoon. The whole way round. 3/4 of an acre. Coconuts along the north side. The new concrete perimeter I had paid for. 2-story. Reinforced posts. A roof that would hold in a storm. And I could not take one brick of it with me. I stayed 11 more days. That surprises people. I stayed because I had to see a lawyer in Cebu City, and because the ferry only goes when it goes, and because, I will be honest, because I did not know where else to be. 11 days in a house where everybody was extremely kind to me, and nobody said one word about anything. The lawyer's office was on Osmeña Boulevard, 3rd floor, above a place selling phone cases. Nice woman, about 40, very direct, which I appreciated. It took her about 20 minutes, and most of that was her being polite about it. The land is titled to Delia. The improvement, the house, belongs to the owner of the land. There was no lease, no deed, no corporation, no acknowledgement of debt, nothing with my name on it anywhere in the entire 3.5 years. She asked whether I had any written agreement at all. I said no. She asked whether I had married Rowena. I said no, and she said, "Well, that is one good thing. Because if I had, and if there had been any prior marriage on her side, we would be having a very different conversation about annulment and about 400,000 and 3 years of my life. She said I could sue. She said a builder's lien claim, unjust enrichment, something might be argued. She said it would take 4 to 6 years, cost more than I had left, and that I would be a foreigner suing a Filipina family in a provincial court in her own barangay. I said thank you, and I paid her $3,500 for the consultation, about $56, which is the last money I spent in that country on anything sensible. I did not confront Delia. People ask me that. Why not go and shout at the old woman? Because she fed me. Because whatever else is true, she was 64 and she had cooked over a fire in a shed her whole life, and now she had a kitchen with a counter, and I could not look at her and take that back, and I would not have been able to anyway. And because, this is the honest reason, because I did not want the last thing between us to be that. The last thing I did before the ferry was go to the school in Ormoc and pay $20,000 directly to the office, about $320, for Angel's fees for the term. Not through GCash, not through anybody. To the window. She was 15, and she wanted to be a pharmacist, and she had done absolutely nothing to me. Now the numbers, because that is why some of you are here, and I do not blame you. I went out with roughly $195,000. I came back with $41,000. 3 years and 4 months, $154,000. The house is $105,000 of it. The rest is the store that never made money, the tricycle, 2 funerals, a nursing course, hospital bills, tuition, rent, and about 1,000 small transfers I cannot itemize because I stopped keeping the sheet. I am 55. My occupational pension, what is left of it, because I took it early against advice, starts paying at 60, and it is small now, around $640 a month. The AOW, the state pension, does not come until 67, and because I lived outside the Netherlands for 3 years, I have gaps, so it will not be the full amount either. I have to fill 12 years. So I work. I took shore contracts, safety inspection, verification, permit auditing, onshore, no rotations, day rate work for a firm in Ijemuiden. I am good at it, and there is plenty of it, because every man my age who could do it is either dead or retired properly. I live in a rented flat in Den Helder, 1 bedroom. I can hear the wind off the harbor again. Marja, my sister, has been kind about it. Completely kind. Not one word of "I told you so," and I want you to understand that this is worse. If she had gloated, I could have been angry at her, and being angry is restful. Instead, she made me dinner and asked whether I wanted the boxes out of her attic. I sleep badly. I open the satellite view on my phone and look at the roof sometimes. It is there. You can see it. The new concrete, the shape of it against the coconut. Somebody put a tarpaulin over part of the back. I do not know why. So, what do I tell you? First, the practical, because that is what I am for. A foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines. You know this already. Everybody knows this already. What nobody tells you is that knowing it does not protect you at all. Because you will not lose your money by forgetting the law. You will lose it by deciding in one specific moment that asking for the paper would insult somebody who has been good to you. That is the failure mode. Not ignorance. Politeness. If you cannot ask for a registered lease without the relationship breaking, then the relationship was already the thing that was going to cost you the house. Verify the title, not the sincerity. I could not tell you which of those two I got wrong, and I have had a year to think about it, and the answer is that I got the first one wrong, and the second one was never mine to judge. Second thing, do not ask whether she loved you or used you. It is not a Dutch light switch. In that kitchen, those are the same action. She loved me, and she took from me, and both of those were true at the same time every single day. And I have stopped trying to separate them because there is no seam. What I can say is that a family with nothing will do what is necessary, and that necessary is a much larger word there than it is here, and that this is not the same as malice. Marilou took $2,000 a month for 3 years and then gave it up because she could not lie in confession anymore. That is also that country. And the last thing, which is the only one that actually matters, do not go looking for someone to be expected by. That is what I did. I have said it plainly now for the first time. I was not searching for a woman. I was searching for a rota, a 14th day, a door, somebody who knew what time I was coming. Marieke died on a Tuesday, while I was offshore, and I never fixed that. I just exported it 12,000 kilometers to a place where being needed can be bought by the month. Fix it at home first. See somebody. Talk to your sister. Get a job you have to turn up to, because if you arrive in Cebu with a hole that shape and 200,000 in the bank, you will find somebody to fill it within a week, and she will not even have to be dishonest to do it. I do not hate her. I want that on the record. I hate that Tuesday. That was Henk Vermeulen, speaking to us from Den Helder. I want to point at one thing before we close, because it is the thing that makes this story different from most of what we cover on this channel. Henk was not deceived about the family. They were real. The kidney failure was real. The funerals were real. The girl in the school uniform is real and is going to sit her exams next year. What he was deceived about was exclusivity, and what he deceived himself about was ownership. Those are two different injuries, and they do not heal at the same speed. And the legal position is not complicated, which is the tragedy of it. Foreign nationals cannot own land in the Philippines. A house built on family land belongs to the person holding the title, and a lifetime of goodwill is not a document. There are structures, long-term registered leases, condominium purchase in your own name, and they exist precisely for the situation Henk was in. They only fail when nobody asks for them. Stories like Henk's are why we put that guide together. Everything we've learned from the men who've told us what went wrong, the patterns, the paperwork, the questions they wish they'd asked, it's in the description if it's something you need. If you're watching this at 3 in the morning, in a quiet house, after losing someone, his last piece of advice is the one to sit with. Grief is a very loud signal, and it travels a long way. And there are people 12,000 kilometers away who can read it in the first 3 messages. That is not a reason to stay home. It is a reason to go with your eyes open and your name on the paper. Thanks for being with us. Take care of yourselves. That's Inside the Philippines.